how old were you when you, I guess, officially went out on your own, or sort of?
Well, I was 21, and my husband and I both left the culture together, and it was just, it's not like you see in the media. There isn't a car waiting in the dark to shuttle you away from the compound. That may be some people's experience, but it wasn't for me. It took me easily 10 years after I left before I began to break down the conditioning that put me there in the first place, and to be able to recognize a fuller picture.
Any interaction with the family after that, or was sort of a complete cutoff, or?
Initially, the interaction was minimized because my parents and family members just didn't know how to interact with me anymore. I was now an outsider, yet I had insider knowledge, and so it was kind of a problem that way. And so it took some time before we could work on those relationships and get things back to where we could trust one another again. And today I do have connections and relationships with many of my family members within that culture still, which I value very much.
Yeah. For those of us who are the outsiders, and we do see the families that walk around, and you always wonder, because you don't ever want to push anybody aside, or you want to talk, but you always wonder if it would be well received and make the gesture, but then you're worried, will they just ignore you? Or so how do we, and this is outsiders, can be better and just better neighbors and better people, and the best way to approach? And is it just simply hi, hello, and what can we do?
That's a really good question, because it's difficult. Even now, when I do meet someone and I'll say hello to one of the kids or someone, they look at me with disdain, with fear, and so I understand it, and I've been on both sides of it now. Don't ever stop doing it, no matter what reception you get, because I remember every time somebody acknowledged me. Even if I turned my face away from that person, even if I was fearful that I would be found out, that my parents would go to jail, which is what we were told. Every time somebody treated me with respect or dignity, it stayed with me. I think that it's still a part of me. I think it's part of what made me want to reach out and be a part of the larger world, because of those people who did just what you're describing, that said hello when everyone else was staring or ignoring, and I was doing the same to them. And so I think we can't underestimate the power of connection. Even if that connection is dismissed, you plant a seed.
Has your relationship changed with culture now that you've written the book?
Very much so. Being outside of it has given me such a different perspective. I have sisters that are practicing polygamists that have allowed me into their homes and their lives and their families. And I respect that they're able to live their life in the way that they want to. And some of them do. It isn't all oppression, as you see on TV. There is plenty of oppression to go around, but there are families that choose with some level of awareness what they're doing. And I respect that. I think I have more respect for the people who practice polygamy that do it well than I ever did or ever saw while growing up in it. And I have more, I should say I have less tolerance for those who abuse the positions they've been given. So a man that abuses his position of power in the polygamous culture, the man is the patriarch, he's the head, and sometimes that position is honored and respected, and other times it's abused. And I think I have a much healthier relationship to the culture, and especially because I'm still involved, I'm still able to interact and see the inner workings. If I get too far away from it, then my perception of it will change as well. So I'm grateful to be both in it and out of it and get a better perspective of what it really is.
I remember when I first moved to Utah about 12 years ago, and I don't remember what the circumstance was, but I remember, this whole idea of polygamy in America was very foreign to me, being raised in Philadelphia. And I remember seeing on the news within the first 6 months that I was here, well, two things. First, I was exposed to a woman who approached me in a public place. She was working with a nonprofit organization that was trying to outreach to polygamous women to empower them to get out of their situation. And shortly after that, I saw on the news in some public parade, there was a group of polygamous women walking with a banner and their faces covered and saying, "This is America. This is our religion. This is what we choose. It's not okay that we have to hide our faces on the street, to be here in America with our religious choices." And I was very perplexed by seeing in a very short time, both sides of that. And I don't know, it seems to me like abuse is the way that people choose to abuse their families or abuse the ones they love is a very different issue from family structure, chosen family structure that's been part of the history of the world. I believe that polygamy is more common throughout world history than monogamous relationships and monogamous families. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that, with regard to the law and that polygamy is not allowed in the United States.
I think one of the reasons that there were women out in a parade carrying a banner at all is because mainstream society has become more and more tolerant of different beliefs and different sort of relationships. And in the era that I was raised in, that tolerance was not there. And for the decades prior to that, there was a hatred and intolerance toward polygamy that has slowly unraveled through the years. And so abuse that occurred, say, in the 70s when I was born is dwindling. The behaviors that I see that I grew up with aren't the common environment for polygamists today. And so I think because it's less secretive, there's more acceptance of it, there's less fear of being prosecuted for it. I think that by itself has allowed women in particular to ask themselves the question, do I choose this? Do I still want to be a part of this culture if I won't be prosecuted? And can I be a part of the mainstream society because it's being more accepted today? And so I've seen the evolution. I've lived that evolution in many ways of that culture going from so secretive that stories of babies being brought home from the hospital in grocery sacks so that the neighbors wouldn't know that the woman living there was married and had a child. From those extremes to seeing polygamous families on Oprah, I think is just an incredible evolution and development of the culture as a whole. And so I think you're on that fault line where you're seeing some of the remnants of the old way that was all about keeping the secret and recognizing this new development, this change in thinking that isn't just a change in thinking for the mainstream society, but it's a change in thinking for the polygamist society as well.
How many children do you have?
I have 6 children, and I felt for many years that I had somehow not done my part to replenish the earth, as they say. My mother had 13 children, and my father's first wife had 16 children. So I figured I would just have 12. And so after I had a few, I realized that was just crazy. There was no way I was going to have 12 kids. I think after my first son was born, I turned to the midwife and said, I'm never having any more kids ever again. That's all it took. So I look at it now and realize that this idea of only having 6 kids, I used to say that preface, I only have 6 kids, as if it was some kind of stain.
Badge of honor.
Absolutely, a well-earned one, I have to say as well.
I'd like to ask another question. It seems as though you have a pretty good relationship with a lot of your family members. Do you find that it was difficult to, with your growth and change, do you find that it was difficult to kind of bridge the gap between your children and their grandparents? Did you run into any major obstacles? Because kids are great and super observant, so they know when things are different.
Yeah, that was a big concern. Initially, I wanted to just pack up the kids and move to Alaska and just erase where they'd come from. The older they got, the more I realized that they needed to know where they came from, no matter how different or dysfunctional it was, that they need to know where they're from and what experiences my parents and their parents had that led them to make the choices that they made. They don't have the kind of relationship with their grandparents that I want with my grandchildren. They know of them, they visit them, they see them, but my father has, 215 grandchildren. They're all just kind of numbers. And so you're not going to have deep, meaningful relationships with 215 grandkids. So they are aware of their background. It's very open about it. They have interactions with many of their cousins, are being raised in a polygamous environment, and they're not. So they're dealing with some really good peer pressure and peer relationships where they have to understand, why does my best friend across the street have to wear dresses and I get to wear pants, for example. So I think it's just an exceptional ground for them to learn about human interaction. That's more how I see it, is an opportunity for them to develop and have greater compassion, greater respect and understanding for people that are different from them by having them be in both worlds, even though I'm not raising them with any of the religious tenets or any of the beliefs that I was brought up with.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
This one popped into my head as we were talking about polygamy and some other things. Do you, in your opinion, being on kind of both sides, do you feel that polygamy being outlawed fosters an environment of abuse because of the secret nature of it? Or do you think that it's merely just someone being put in a position of power and therefore it's more of an individual thing that's perpetuated?
It's definitely both, but I can't underestimate the impact that secrecy has on fostering crime of any kind. I think that as soon as you make something forbidden and people have to do what they want to do behind closed doors, I think that that's it right there is an opportunity for crimes to be committed. And abuse is just one of those types of crimes. So I think the secrecy is devastating on the polygamous communities. Why I'm so thrilled to see the openness and a lot more media attention, because even if it's negative media attention, it's still attention, and it begins to change that element, even if it is a slow change.
I am so impressed with how eloquent you are, and how I'm wondering how you got to be that way when you were raised in a family and situation where free thought was not encouraged and dialogue was not encouraged. I mean, how you reach adulthood and then be able to communicate the way you do so beautifully with your observations about society and the way people are, when it seems like it would all be so new to you as a 20-year-old, being born at 20 when
Right.
you're not used to this.
I think there are a lot of factors that led to that, but I think the best and most concise answer to your question is that I went all the way through the ignorance, through the repression, through it all to come out onto the other side. So I feel like, in a way, that cloistered environment actually fostered the very thing you're describing. Not because it would naturally do so, but because I chose to use it in that way. It forced me to look inward. It encouraged me to look deeper, to look for answers within, to look at human behavior as, well, it was a survival skill that had to be developed. When I was pulled out of school, I'd had a 5th grade education, and we were pulled out of school because we were needed to work. Laundry needed to be done. We couldn't be further educated. We did get our reading, writing, and arithmetic, and so we were pulled out of school. And I was hungry for knowledge and learning. And I just saw that as an opportunity to seek out different means of education. And there was something about it being denied that sparked a fire for self-learning that I don't think I would have if I had just been given all these opportunities to just go to the best schools and learn everything. I took the opportunity of not having that and built a fire of passion and a drive to self-educate. And so that's pretty much just been a lifelong thing for me. When I got pulled out of school, I snuck a history book up into the bedroom so that I could read it in the bathroom when my work was done. And I had no reason, there was no motivation for it, except I just needed to know about the world. And having it taken away really created the drive to provide it for myself. And it developed an independence.
So you've had no formal education beyond 5th grade?
No.
I have one more question.
Okay.
You speak so beautifully about your process of forgiveness. I'm wondering how much of that is in the book, or if, the book was kind of finished and the process of forgiving
Follow.
Yeah, well, came through the talking and sharing and all
Right.
that.
The book is about abuse and the isolation and how isolation creates a warped sense of, and abuse, a warped sense of oneself. But the transcendent message within the book that I've written is that freedom is within. That your outer circumstances cannot dictate the level of freedom that you feel and can exercise within yourself. When you are free inside, nothing outside of you can hold you back. And I had that awareness at 17 years old, and it carried me through some pretty dark times in my life. I have since healed a great deal since writing the book, and because of it. And I'm working on a second book that talks a lot more about the healing process and hopefully will enlighten others to recognize when somebody leaves a culture or a religion or something that's, even their own family, can be a very painful process, and it doesn't happen overnight. And I wanted to highlight the subtleties of that experience rather than just the focus on, getting away and living a different life. I wanted to talk about the struggle to hold on to those things. How hard it was to cut my hair, and how many times I reached up and felt those little hairs on the back of my head and felt like a bad person. Years and years after I didn't believe it anymore. To really talk about how you go from seeing yourself as a worthless person to recognizing your value, and the space in between, the confrontation of your own past, and how that changes you from the inside out, not from the outside in. Although it required some outside changes to get to that deep place. So the second book that I'm working on, and hopefully will publish soon, talks more about that forgiveness process.